Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Niners News here on 49ers Hive. My name is Zach Hernandez. I'm joined by my friend Matt Llewellyn. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Zach. Let's get right into it.
So today, guys, we're going to be talking about the newly voted upon proposal that NFL coaches are able to interview freely for other positions without their team being able to block it. Matt, is this going to hurt the 49ers?
It could potentially, especially if they continue on their growth and stay a competitive team. That's where, usually you see the most movement from coaching staffs, other than people getting fired, is the coaches from the good teams getting an opportunity, and you think about Adam Peters, you think about, Coach K on the D line. These are all people that could end up going somewhere and getting some play at a higher position. For Peters, he could be the actual GM instead of working under John Lynch. And Coach K can end up being a defensive coordinator. The 49ers D line last year was outstanding. And so he's going to catch some eyeballs for sure. And the big thing was that even before that, you could get a higher position and they couldn't block you, but now even lateral position moves they can't block at all. So it does kind of open up a little bit of a bit of a can of worms for the 49ers. If they continue along the path of being really good, they're going to have to maybe find a way to replace those coaches.
Yeah, I think the main thing is there's a lot of turnover. Teams trying to prevent that. Teams trying to keep, what they have going. And if they're a good team, they likely have good coaches on the staff. So it's going to be tough. I mean, the 49ers, they were able to block previously. I was looking up kind of some history of this. They recently blocked DeMeco Ryans from going over to Tennessee. And then they also had blocked Rick Scangarello from going over to Denver. And that's just, two that came right off the top of my search results when doing research. I think one aspect that people aren't talking about is sometimes these lower level coaches or assistant position coaches, they ask to be blocked almost out of respect, when they know they're not going to take a position or they don't have any interest in it. They ask their teams, hey, can you block this for me? That way, it's out of my hands. Yeah. Essentially. I'm not making the choice to not take the job. I wasn't even able to be in the conversation for it to begin with. Now, I mean, they have, like you said, Coach K. They recently lost Joe Woods. That was a big one. Their defensive back coach. Do they have any sort of succession plan in place, do you think? Or do you think this is going to catch them totally off guard?
I don't think it's going to catch them off guard. And I do agree with your point that, the courtesy block is something that's going to be missed. You don't want to burn a bridge or ruffle feathers and just say no. They had that avenue to where you could say, hey, I can't take the job. They're not going to let me take the job. And now that's off the table. So I think we're going to see a little bit more movement amongst coaches, especially, I haven't kept up on the modifications to the Rooney Rule, but if there's any sort of draft compensation for that, I mean, you're just opening up Pandora's box and it's going to be a nightmare. I think that in particular, that modification to the Rooney Rule is misguided. I don't think it's good. I think that it's using something very serious as a commodity, and I disagree with that. But that's a conversation for a different day, and we're talking about coaches. But I do think more could be on the move. As for the 49ers, I mean, that Mike Shanahan tree is awfully large, and Kyle's just, basking in the shade of it right now. There's plenty of more branches to go to. If people leave town, you have Robert Saleh. I'm sure he has plenty of connections if he loses some defensive coaches. There are things that they can do. Coaching trees tend to run pretty deep, and connections seem to run pretty deep. Don't forget, there's also the college ranks to think about. You can pull a coach from college if you need to, someone who's in a similar system or from a similar coaching tree. So they do have options. It's just that you might not necessarily want to always be replacing coaches. And this could turn into a situation where every year there's at least one coach that's on the move.
I saw when this report originally came out, it was Jim Trotter that broke the news. And he was talking about how, this is huge because guys were prevented from being able to interview for assistant GM, like you said, guys like Adam Peters. Say if Adam Peters were to get a positional, or an interview elsewhere for the same position or for, even the general manager position, which they wouldn't have been able to block before, but let's just say hypothetically, is there any concern that there's no continuity when it comes to evaluating players And, as far as what the 49ers model that they've had thus far, scouting players, grading players going into the draft, because they've been able to get some pretty high success rates on these picks.
There could be some continuity issues. The thing is, you would hope that Peters is also, he's the assistant GM and he's working with John Lynch, but Peters is known as a personnel guy. So you have to think that hopefully Peters is, talking with the top scout, who's talking with the area scouts, who's talking with the local scouts, and they're all on the same page as to what they're kind of like looking for in players. So that way, even if Peters does leave, John Lynch has somebody who can step in and maybe not do it as well as Peters, but kind of lessen the drop off. It's one of those things where you want to have as much continuity as possible. And even if there is some disruption, hopefully you have guys in the pipeline that can kind of pick up the slack and know what the team is looking for.
You totally agree. They should have these plans in place, guys kind of already stepping up to do these types of things in the anticipation of somebody like Adam Peters moving on. I don't think it's any secret that he's kind of been the big name for the last year or so, next in line to get a big position, like a GM or even assistant GM elsewhere. So I don't think the 49ers would be shocked if that were to happen at all. Now, we've been talking about this possibly hurting the 49ers. Is there any scenario in which it helps the 49ers?
That's really hard to say. They look pretty, on the offensive end, you're talking about position coaches only, because Kyle is the head coach and the offensive coordinator. Robert Saleh is there on the defensive side. And again, so we're talking about position coaches. I guess there's argument to be made that every position group could be upgraded in some capacity. But I don't see how there would be any tangible improvement that the 49ers could make coming off of a Super Bowl run. Their coaching staff is coming back intact this year. So for them to bring back the same coaches they went to a Super Bowl with is about as good as you're going to be able to do. And I think that's actually pretty rare in the NFL to return the entire coaching staff after a Super Bowl run, even one you don't necessarily win. Now, I'm not sure. I haven't, really looked into it, but I would be willing to bet that KC might have lost a coach or two due to the whole thing. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure they did, but most Super Bowl teams lose players, they lose coaches, and the 49ers were able to keep their coaching staff intact. Now, they did lose DeForest Buckner to a trade, and they did lose Emmanuel Sanders to free agency, but they were able to kind of fill those holes through the draft, which most teams will fill departing players with new ones. Coaching is a little bit more difficult to fill on short notice and to find the guys available that fit your system.
I'm so glad you said the coaching aspect returning, because all offseason, all we've heard is, well, they're bringing back, 98% of their players. But I think coaching is equally, if not more important, because these are the guys that are laying, the ground blocks, they're laying the schemes, they're coaching it, seeing what needs to be done day in and day out. And if those guys aren't coming back, if you have new faces there, it doesn't matter, if the same players are coming back or not. So that's a huge aspect. I'm really glad you touched on that. And I agree with you. Most times teams, either that they make win or lose a Super Bowl, the next year they're completely different. All eyes are on them because they're the model of success, so to speak. So they're looked to as, well, we got to pick either players or coaches out of their staffs and try and, model our franchise after that. And the 49ers were completely able to avoid that this year somehow. So that's got to be huge.
It is huge. And if you think about it, again, we talk about Kyle Shanahan. He's the offensive coordinator, but he's not, he has head coaching duties that he has to look over the whole practice, right? Now, if you have continuity with the coaches and you have the same position coaches back, when they break out into their position groups during practice, the quarterback coach knows what Coach Shanahan wants. The running back coach knows what Coach Shanahan wants. Without turnover, you don't have to worry about breaking in new guys, new coaches to the Shanahan scheme. Everybody talks about year 2 in a Shanahan scheme for players, but you have to wonder about coaches too, and how you conduct practice is going to have a huge effect in how you play in the games.
That's a great point. It's like, constantly getting new employees at your work. You have to stop doing what you're doing to train them. If it's the same people day in and day out, you don't worry about that kind of stuff. So all in all, I don't think this should hurt the 49ers too much. Granted, if, not too many coaches are plucked from their staff, obviously, as with any staff.
Right.
That's going to do it for us today, guys. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Niners News. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. Our handles are below. Go check that out. And also make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment.
Go ahead and hit the bell for all your notifications. We're bringing you content each day of the week.
Thanks, guys.